Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Elisa Sklar. I'm the VP of Marketing at GIS Planning, and today we're going to be talking about bridging the digital divide for your community, expand broadband access with Connected Nation. And before I introduce our guest speaker for today, I just want to say a couple words about how we run our webinars here at GIS Planning. You will notice that you are muted. However, we welcome questions. You'll find the questions field in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll be keeping an eye on those throughout the session, and we will be very happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. The second thing I want to let you know is that we are recording today's session, as we always do, and I will be sharing the link to this video recording and to our guest presenter's slide deck in a follow-up email tomorrow, so check your inboxes for that. And with that, I'm really thrilled to introduce today's presenter, who is Chris Pedersen. He is the Executive Vice President of Development and Planning with Connected Nation. And Chris is going to talk to us about bridging digital divide for your community and how one goes about expanding broadband access for your community. Chris, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you inviting me to come and talk about an important topic.
Well, it really is an important topic, and particularly important in light of the pandemic. I think absolutely there's no question that issues of internet access, broadband access in particular, have really been highlighted by restrictions that people have experienced throughout this. So we're really excited to hear what you have to say. Looking forward to it.
So thanks for the introduction. The slides and the content I'm going to cover today are on this slide here. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview about Connected Nation and who we are and what we do. It's going to be important when we talk about broadband and the digital divide to walk through a framework which we've sort of boiled down into three primary pillars: access, adoption, and use. And then we'll go talk a little bit about community engagement, broadband assessments, and local technology action planning, and then cover telework and job creation programming. And lastly, I'll close up with some telehealth initiatives to share with you all. And of course, leave some room for the end of the presentation to answer any questions you all might have. All right, so Connected Nation, we're a national nonprofit that's been around for about 20 years, and our mission is to improve lives by providing innovative solutions that expand the access, adoption, and use of high-speed internet and its related technologies to all people. Some of our core competencies include network mapping, field validation work and analyses, residential and business technology research, local, state, and national policy analysis and capacity building, state and local broadband strategic planning, school connectivity and E-rate program strategy, as well as digital literacy, skills, and inclusion programming. A little bit more about our history. We have, had various different programs and initiatives across over 30 different states, 13 of which were public-private partnerships in broadband. Another 13 was a library-focused initiative in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we also collected broadband data across the U.S. From broadband providers directly, and therefore have 1,500 different broadband providers we've been in communication with over the years to collect and process data, and ultimately providing data to the National Broadband Map, representing over 40% of the U.S. landmass. And then on a more local level, we have conducted community engagements, which I'll talk about here later on in 9 states, and supported telework initiatives across 17 states. And they've just done a smattering of different research and data collection and telehealth and education. So hopefully some of that will come through as part of this presentation. So as I opened up with the broadband framework, it's really important, and we've always sort of looked at broadband from three pillars. One, access, or essentially the supply of broadband, that physical connection to the infrastructure that brings the high-speed internet. And then the demand side, the adoption and use. Adoption, essentially recognizing the value in broadband and subscribing either at home, work, or via public institutions. And then lastly, use, having the skills and applications to leverage broadband to improve quality of life and community or economic development. So having that framework, I think, will be good for most any kind of planning initiative you jump into. A little bit more about access, because it's just good to level set on what we mean by broadband. So, and I'm just kind of going into glossary of terms here, but when we talk about broadband, there are a number of different technology transmission platforms. So many of you familiar with this, so mobile broadband, fixed wireless satellite, and then when we look at wireline, we're looking at cable, DSL, and fiber. Most often, when we talk about broadband and you're looking at broadband maps, it's referring to fixed terrestrial broadband, essentially service designed for stationary use at a home, business, or institution, and it entails fiber, cable, DSL, and fixed wireless. Fixed wireless falls into that fixed terrestrial broadband category. So when you look at the broadband maps through the FCC or other broadband maps, that's typically how that classification structure works. Also, another sort of level setting here is to take a look at the speeds. The speeds have been measured for many different years, and when we first started collecting broadband data back around mid-2000s, and then really heavy into broadband data collection with the federal grants in 2009, broadband was defined as 768 kilobits per second down and 200 kilobits per second up. And then since then, it is essentially has been creeping up to 4 megabits per second down, 1 up, 10 down, 1 up, and now we're looking at 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up. That is how the FCC defines broadband, and when you're looking at any kinds of maps, that's typically what you're referencing currently. Who knows what it will be in years from now. Also on this slide, just to give you an idea for how these speeds vary and what kinds of applications and devices they support across 10 meg, 25 meg, and 1 gig. So again, just wanting to level set, what is broadband as it's defined most currently across the US. All right, getting into the history a little bit, there was some broadband mapping that took place prior to 2009. A handful of different states, Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, California, had developed maps, but then in 2008 was the passing of the Broadband Data Improvement Act, and it created a grant program for states to launch their own mapping and planning programs. That State Broadband Initiative Grant Program, often referred to as SBI, was administered through the National Telecommunications Information Administration. And every state and territory submitted data on service availability to the NTIA. And that essentially was all aggregated and updated into the National Broadband Map through 2014. The data was road segment level data and segment in census blocks larger than 2 square miles, and then census blocks at the census block level everywhere else. So on the tail end of that grant program, the FCC revised its Form 477, which was essentially is going to transition this data collection and data submission process to the FCC. So from 2014 until now, broadband providers, they submit Form 477 data to the FCC twice a year. For fixed broadband, it's, like I said earlier, fixed terrestrial broadband. It's a list of census blocks or services available. And for mobile wireless, just mobile wireless, the data submitted in a geospatial format. So there are some problems with that, and I won't get too in the weeds of it, but it might be good, again, to level set. The problem with the census blocks are census blocks range in size from 1/10 of a square mile to more than 5,000 square miles. And the way it's reported to the FCC is if that provider reports service to at least one household in any given census block, then that entire block is considered to be served. So when you look at census blocks in the country that are larger than the District of Columbia, 68 square miles, or 8 census blocks that are larger than Connecticut, it really leaves a lot of room for overstatement and error. So census blocks are largest in the rural areas, and yet those are the areas where broadband needs to be best defined. I mean, that's where broadband is typically needed and where we feel the digital divide the most. And yet the way we currently measure it at the FCC or national level isn't very granular. Just a few minor things about the FCC Form 477 data. Not all providers are submitting the data as required, so there could be some understatement in service availability. Not all providers have GIS capabilities, limiting their ability to generate accurate reports about census blocks they served. Fixed broadband is filed as a CSV only file, not in geospatial format. And then fixed wireless services are not filed as coverage areas, unlike mobile services. So it's not like they submit a propagation study or a geospatial, polygon. It's also by census block. So the last thing to just mention is when you go to that map, the data is very old. I say varies, 6 to sometimes 18 months from when the time the data is submitted to when it is actually published and made available for the public to consume. So Connected Nation, we conducted a field validation exercise in Walton County, Florida, and this gives you an idea just in real life what the disparity is between the Form 477 data versus the road level data that we validated with engineers on the ground, ensuring that the infrastructure was there. So it's pretty significant difference between the two. So this is also very important because a lot of the funds that are put towards broadband deployment are based on this data. All right, now let's jump into adoption and use. Oftentimes these terms get commingled, and I just want to make sure we level set on this as well. Like you'll hear a big school district in Chicago or Dallas say, hey, a lot of these kids, they don't have access to internet, 100,000 in Chicago, 65,000 in Dallas. We need to be careful with that terminology because it's not necessarily that they don't have physical access to broadband. They don't subscribe to broadband in their home due to affordability or some other reason. So wanted to level set on that too. Now, when we dig deep into adoption, there could be a number of different, we can segment it a number of different ways. You can find adoption data through the Census, American Community Survey, and we collect it at the community level, and I'll share how we go about that in just a moment, but it allows us to really segment where adoption is high or low and what the barriers are. Why, if, broadband is available to, let's say 80% of a community and only 50% subscribe or adopt broadband, what gives? What's the reason? And so this is just an example of how we can dig a little bit deeper into adoption and the barriers so we can target a specific solution for that barrier. So you see here in this community on the bottom right-hand chart, we could say, oh gosh, across all households, the reason why they're not adopting is 48% say it's not available, or 23.9% say it's too expensive. So, and you go down the list and you go across the demographic, you can see how this could really inform some good solutions to close these gaps. Next, let's get into use. This is kind of the fun part. This is where we talk a little bit about the benefits, how we're improving lives through closing the digital divide. So this really spans all sectors. You can see here are some returns or benefits of closing the divide. Having broadband provides households with an estimated $1,850 annual economic benefit. 30% of tourism transactions in the US are made online. And I'm not going to read all of these, but it's important for communities to really understand what the benefits are. Telemedicine adds an estimated $522,000 to rural economies and reduce hospitalizations. So anyway, as Alyssa said, she'll share this slide deck after I'm through, and so you'll have access to some of these stats. I wanted to ensure we had time to get into the community assessments and telehealth. So the community assessments and broadband planning. Basically, we often are contacted by rural communities. It's typically the rural communities that have struggled with economic recession, disinvestment, and community decline, and they recognize that, gosh, if they could just close the divide or they could leverage technology, it could really stimulate economic activity in the community and improve access to healthcare, education, government services, and more. So a strategic planning assessment and investment in access, adoption, and use can lead to community and economic development, civic engagement, family and youth retention, human capital development in the community. So our program that we have used, our framework, is we call it connected community engagement. We see as a conduit and framework through which communities can address broadband technology issues to achieve stability, sustainability, and transformation. In terms of the process, I'll boil it down to four sort of major steps. First is the engagement part. We really recognize it's important to create a local broadband planning team that represents multi-sectors, and I'll give you an example of what one looks like in just a minute. Creating that broadband planning team to kind of take the helm, and we oftentimes have a community technology advisor to be there as a resource for the community. And then we assess, we identify the local assets, current projects, and assess broadband access, adoption, and use. The three things that I just explained: where it is, the competition, what are the barriers, how people are using it or how they wish to use it, all that gets assessed. And then that broadband planning team, which oftentimes it's the first time they are sitting around a really robust body of data relative to their technology needs in the community and their technology assets, begin planning and collaborating and developing a technology action plan, and then prioritizing those action items. And then lastly, moving forward with it, promoting what they're doing, promoting what the strengths that came from that assessment, and implementing their priority projects. Like I said, I wanted to share, I think it's important to see what the makeup of a broadband planning team looks like. Here's a team from Ward County, Texas. You can see it's pretty well rounded. The Chamber of Commerce, the city, the county, the Economic Development Corporation, the hospital, the library, the ISD, the internet service providers, Odessa College or higher ed, the Department of Ag. It's pretty well rounded. And of course, you know, every community has a different composition, but we really want to make sure it's a good cross section of the community. And then it really boils down to getting that localized data. So we collect a lot of the data via broadband surveys. And here are just a few examples. We're collecting data across residents, businesses, and community anchor institutions. So I've got these examples here showing average download speeds among businesses and digital communications among businesses, how they're using these various applications. And I'm going to go through just a smattering of different data points and images that come from that, or assessment products that come from that engagement. Here you will see those survey responses geocoded on the map, so that when you look at that assessment, you can pull up, and this actually is an interactive map that the community uses, where you can drill down to the respondents that indicate their internet needs are not met. So in the case of Ward County, Texas, 79.5% of households with internet access were dissatisfied with their current service. So when you sit down as a broadband planning team and you have all the providers in them, or some of the providers, or however many providers in the room looking at this, it's very powerful. So having this data at your fingertips. And of course, this kind of data is also really important to substantiate grant applications and what have you. We've layered on other layers to this: population density, federal broadband build out commitments. I mean, you could dice it a number of different ways. But the key is to have that very granular local data. And then again, here are just a few examples of some of the data captured locally, how people are using healthcare applications, and how that is benchmarked to other communities, or what is the average monthly cost of internet in that community? How is that benchmarked against other communities? And we typically use a 2% of household median income as sort of a measure for, if it's over that as an average in a community, then it's pretty expensive. So anyway, a lot of these metrics are really important to the planning process. And with that plan, going across all this various survey points, the community is able to identify where they have the biggest opportunities to make improvements. So a result of some of these plans are, I just put a few up here. Clare County, Michigan, a small ILIC was installing gigabit services and partnered with the local community to help create technology summits to connect businesses. And another example in Fairfield County, Ohio, through that assessment and planning process, we're able to streamline the permitting process, resulting in a new fiber to the home connectivity to 750 homes. So a lot of it is just getting everybody around good data to plan forward. All right. Now I want to transition to Digital Works, Telework initiative. Essentially, this started from a digital literacy program where we originally were providing basic skills training to people that were coming into community centers and libraries and what have you. But we saw there was a big need for them to take those skills for job placement. And so we evolved the curriculum and connected with employers that were seeking remote workers. And so now there are 70, network of 70 different employers that all need remote workers. And we have training that was built to support that demand. And over the course of a few years now, we've placed over 1,000 remote workers. And here are a few settings to give you an example. In Newaygo, Michigan, 13,000 square foot business incubator was being underutilized and needed some more tenants to really make good use of it. So we initiated a Digital Works remote job training center within that facility that was initially paid for through the EDA. Another example, Gallipolis, Ohio, in partnership with the Jobs and Family Services, use their facility to essentially over the course of 3 years create 167 full and part-time jobs. And this is an area, you know, with 26% living in poverty, and you know, county-wide, a population of 31,000. Lastly, I'll share an example from Digital Works in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Military spouses have some of the highest unemployment rates in the country, exceeding 25%. And recognizing that, as well as recognizing some of the employment needs of veterans, we were funded to do an initiative just outside of the gates of Fort Campbell. Again, the idea is that if you can deliver training and placement support services for remote work, then those program graduates have the flexibility to take the job wherever they want to go or live wherever they want to live. So we've seen it very successful in rural settings, and then in settings such as this one in Fort Campbell. All right, and I'll leave the personal anecdotes for when you get the slide deck later. Got just a few minutes. I want to make sure I leave for questions. The last thing I want to cover is telehealth. We were recently funded through the Michigan Health Endowment Fund and in partnership with the AARP to do some research relative to telehealth. The questions we were to answer were: how are rural Michigan households interacting online with healthcare providers, and how are rural Michiganders' perceptions on telehealth tools, and what concerns prevent rural Michigan residents from using telehealth applications? So I've got just a couple slides to share those results, because those are the results, once we could dig into them and really identify what the major concerns are, we developed an implementation plan to overcome those barriers or those concerns. So when you look at the online interaction with healthcare providers, here you can see how those counties fared and sort of the total across all counties. And not a huge surprise, you can see how the interaction declines with age. And then you can see 33% adults with disabilities, 41% with households with children, and 20% living alone. So it's kind of interesting to look across those 5 counties and how they fared. Also, you know, looking at how to improve the use of telehealth, we wanted to take a look at what some of the concerns were. So here is a view across all counties of the potential for the online health services to cost more than in-person visits, that being a concern for the participants in the study. So roughly 30% very concerned. You look at another concern, the privacy of the patient's online data. This is where you saw a really significant uptick that, you know, over 50% of those respondents were demonstrating high concern over privacy of online data. And then lastly, concerns over the ability to use a computer or an internet. Well, very few were concerned about that. So anyway, I share this because it's this kind of data that allows us to introduce various interventions to improve the use of telehealth. And if you'd like to read more about this report, here's the link. It's a pretty exhaustive report, but these were just a few highlights from it. All right, and I think I've got it wrapped up in time for some questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yes, absolutely. There definitely have been a few questions that have come in, so I will take a look at those. Michael wants to know, what is GIS capability? Why is it important, and how is that different than road level data?
Why is the Form 477 data different than the road level data?
It was specifically about GIS capability that you mentioned at the beginning, I believe, and I'm just looking at what Michael's written in. He says, what is GIS capability and why is it important, and how is that different than road level data? Does that make sense to you as a question you can answer?
I think so. So the road level data is important because we're able to get in and get more granular as to where there is DSL cable or fiber to the home. Whereas the GIS data that comes into us at a less granular level data, it allows for, or it makes it more difficult to target an intervention in those geographies. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, Michael, if it didn't,
clarify.
Feel free to clarify. Exactly. Okay, yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
And let's see, how can economic developers work with Connected Nation to improve or just get broadband coverage in their communities? So what would kind of just in a nutshell be the best set of initial steps in order to be able to work with you to do that?
Well, you can always reach out to us and discuss what you're wanting to achieve. And we're also happy to point you to funding sources that are helpful to either fund infrastructure projects or fund other kinds of projects such as digital literacy or what have you. The NTIA has done a really good job of providing an inventory or a federal funding guidebook of all the various broadband funding programs that are available out there. So I guess the thing is just reach out to us. We're happy to point you in the right direction, and if we can help, we certainly will.
Okay, excellent. Another question, I guess that a lot of people are concerned right now about their small and medium-sized businesses. And so this question is, can you help us promote our fiber internet broadband as a resource for new businesses and residents?
Yeah, we've had that question come up quite a bit. And so being able to substantiate your level of connectivity in the community is going to be really important if you want to promote it. So, having, something more substantial than the Form 477 data to substantiate that level of connectivity is really important. And we can certainly provide some ideas on how you get that word out. But I think the important thing is ensuring that the data that you share to promote these small businesses and the community is going to be accurate. Because the last thing you'd want to do is promote it and then you have new entrants into the market and they and the level of connectivity there falls short of what they wanted.
Absolutely. Okay. Angie wants to know, do you see a lot of communities applying for pandemic EDA grants to cover the cost of contracting with you for community broadband programs? She says they'd love some guidance to sell this to people who are very non-technical but desperately need this broadband access. Sorry, Angie, I added the word desperately in there. She did not put that in there, to be totally fair. But this is something that I'm definitely hearing from a lot of people across Canada and the US. I think the technology ignorance holds many communities back from applying for things like this. A great question.
Yeah, we find that too. A lot of communities don't know where to start. So I believe the EDA has economic adjustment assistance funds that have been bolstered by CARES Act funds recently that can help with technical assistance and planning. And then more recently, I'm seeing a lot of philanthropy getting involved in this space. Because really, when you think about technology and the digital divide, it really impacts everything, right? So if you're a foundation and your focus is on mental health, or your focus is on a particular area, there's only, I mean, particularly now during the pandemic, there's only so many resources you can provide before you become limited by the lack of technology in the community or lack of connectivity in the community. So we see foundations and philanthropy really wanting to get more involved in this space.
Okay. Angie, you see Chris's contact information on the screen. So for more information, maybe specific to your context, I would encourage you to reach out with him. And then a question here, just because we're going a little over time, but I think this is another really important question, is what kind of funding sources are available? So you talked about EDA grants. What else is there out there for?
Yeah, there's a ton, and I'm happy to share that federal funding guide through the NTIA, but there are tons through USDA, EDA. A lot of states, it's becoming more prominent. I mean, I think we're over 30 now. A lot of states are instituting their own broadband grant programs where providers can apply for funds, and they pay 50% and the state pays the other 50% to close infrastructure gaps in communities. So it's really broad. And of course, there's recurring funds coming through the FCC, the Universal Service Fund, to close gaps. But again, I'm happy to share that link to the NTIA's federal funding guide because it's pretty comprehensive. It doesn't cover the state level funds, but it covers the federal level funds.
Great.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could share that link and we could put that in the follow-up email along with your contact information.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be great. Well, with that, since we've gone a little bit over, I am going to suggest that we can carry the conversation with you on offline. People will have your information. I will include a link to the connectednation.org website, Chris's email information. You'll have a link to this video, as well as a link to the slide deck in the follow-up email that you will see from us tomorrow. Chris, thank you so much. Super timely, really, really important subject. I was glad to see so many people join in with us today, so we appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me. So happy to be here and talk on the subject. I mean, it is really timely. I wish we could all kind of get together and do more to close the digital divide. I mean, it's more apparent now than ever before. So I encourage anybody, if you have questions or follow-up, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email, and I'll follow up with you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy days and for doing the work that you do to keep your communities thriving during this challenging time. We appreciate you, and we will be in touch. Have a good day. Stay safe. Bye-bye.